Good morning, everybody. This was a lot less intimidating last night when I came here and there weren't 1,600 eyes looking at me, but it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to be here today. I was really pleased to be invited to speak when I spoke with Case, and thank you very much for having me, and thank you for special thanks to the organizers. Everything looks really great today. So, in case the title here has you wondering, I'm not a spy, I'm not a secret agent. I wish I was, but I'm going to talk today about something that's really fairly simple, but it's a pretty powerful concept as well, and it's something that I think is pretty practical. And it comes from some of the work that I do in coaching these days, and I think it's really applicable regardless of whether you work in engineering or in product or even customer service. Like, it really doesn't matter. And the concept is that I'd argue that in life, events take one of three forms. They are the ones that we can control, the ones that we can influence, which sometimes takes a better clicker than this one, and the last one are ones that we can accept. Now, in life, as humans, we actually control very, very little. There are a lot of things that we have to accept in the world, but we've also got this really huge capacity for influencing one another. And when it comes to how we handle the moments that occur in our lives, when we mix these up, what we often see are things like stress, anger, frustration, anxiety, and generally like quite miserable lives. But when we get them right, that often amounts to things like really effective decision-making, better prioritization, and generally like more wins in life. And furthermore, I'd argue that I think influence through effective communication is probably one of the most important skills that you can develop, not only for your career, but for your life in general. But before I get too far into things, I just want to share a little bit about myself. Case told you a little bit. My name's obviously Jeff Caselden. I'm the co-founder of an Irish consultancy called Caselden Consulting. I know it's a really original name. And some of you, as Case said, might have seen me around already. I work in Ziad's domain of core banking, and I work pretty closely with the core account and the direct debit network teams. And it's probably obvious I'm not Swedish, and I might not even really sound like I'm Irish, and that's because I'm actually from Indiana. And this is a picture of our state capitol building. I was hoping people would laugh at that. I moved to Seattle, Washington in 1998, and I spent over 6 years there. And then I moved to the Bay Area in California, lived in San Francisco, worked in Silicon Valley. That was about 2004. And about 10 years ago, I moved to Dublin, Ireland, and became a European citizen just in time for America to get great again. Wow, you're laughing at all my jokes. This is amazing. And I think the more important, or the more interesting thing about me, perhaps, when people talk to me and they find out about me, a little bit about me, is that I spent nearly 18 years with this little bitty company called Amazon.com. Now, in many ways, I was really kind of an accidental Amazonian. Like, I stumbled into the company in 1999, and I really didn't have any idea where this was going to lead in my life. And at that point in time, this whole idea of e-commerce was still kind of a new concept. And when I started Amazon, we only had 3 websites, the US, UK, and Germany. And we only sold 3 things: books, music, and video in the form of VHS cassettes, which I just found one in the room over there. So it's good to know that these guys are using the most modern technology possible. Amazon's obviously changed a lot since 1999, though. Amazon builds their own devices now, things like the Kindle, the Fire TV. AWS is obviously a big part of their company. They produce their own content. They're in the media business now. They're huge players in advertising, and they do a lot in the logistics space as well. And now they're actually one of the largest companies in the world, just teetering back and forth with that $1 trillion valuation over the last couple of weeks. And they actually run big parts of Klarna's infrastructure. Now, Amazon has always fancied itself as a really peculiar company, so it's pretty fitting that my career there was also pretty peculiar itself. So I started in customer service in Amazon, answering phone calls and emails from people wanting to know, like, hey, where the hell is my stuff? And here I am, at 26, lots more hair than I have now, obviously. But it was a really cool job. It was really great to be at the coalface, dealing with customers who were using the products and services that Amazon provides. and really getting to see what their experience was, despite a few times where people screamed at me on the phone. And in 2001, I moved to the help desk. I started working in infrastructure services at Amazon, and I dealt with lots of this kind of stuff. And I owned a couple of really cool things, like I owned customer service, mail routing for the entire company, making sure that customers write to us, that the emails end up in the right queue. And I also owned the software that onboarded all new employees into Amazon. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that was also a really cool job. It gave me the opportunity to connect with lots of different teams from across the company and find out what people were doing. And when I moved to California in 2004, this clicker is going to be the death of me today, I joined a company called A9. And A9 is an Amazon subsidiary that specializes in search technology and advertising. And I was hired as the first operations engineer into the search team. And it was my first time working on a really big revenue-generating service for the company. And so there was a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, because we drove about 50 to 60% of Amazon's retail revenues. So when you made a mistake, it cost the company millions of dollars, usually in minutes. And I spent about 12 years in search, and I moved to Dublin in the process. And I ended up heading up search for all of EMEA for several years. And in the last few years that I was there, I was the general manager for the Dublin Development Center. And I even ended up on television, as you see here, and in the papers, a couple times where I didn't really intend to. And it was an amazing thing. The company was about 300 people, or the site was about 300 people when I joined, and we grew to about 1,400 over the next 3 years. And I never really expected that I would have the experience that I did there. Like, I met Werner Vogels, who's the CTO of AWS, met the Prime Minister of Ireland a couple of times, and I ended up even exchanging some emails with Jeff Bezos, which is a little stressful, but that's another story. And it was a really amazing journey in my time at Amazon, and I really felt like I learned a lot. I had some of the best mentors I've ever had in my entire career. But almost actually 2 years ago, pretty close to the day, was my last day in an Amazon office, and I just figured it was time for me to experience some new horizons. I didn't want to have any regrets in my life. So I started my own company, and a lot of the work that I do now is as a coach, and also helping other companies, like Klarna, who are going through that same kind of growth trajectory that we did at Amazon. So I've talked about this idea of CIA, and I wanted to discuss something today that I thought was universally useful, and not only comes, it touches on some of my time at Amazon, but it's something that I believe really strongly in. And I hope it offers new perspectives for you. And I'm going to talk a little bit why I think this matters. I'm going to share some evidence, some data, and some stories to back up my assertions here. I'm going to discuss how this has impacted my own life, my own career, and how I lead today. And I'm going to offer you some tips and some food for thought at the end that hopefully you can apply in your own life and your own career. So I started with this statement that we control very little in life. And just a quick show of hands, how many of you agree with that statement? Wow, more than I expected. Cool. Well, it might sound a little crazy. It might even sound kind of antithetical, because as we think of ourselves as humans, we often have this perception of being, these beings that just have all this choice in front of us. And right now, for instance, with the phones that we all have in our pockets, we've hundreds of apps that let us do all kinds of things, and we can waste all kinds of time. And it often gives us this illusion of control. And if we take my trip here today as an example, when I was working on finishing things up Sunday, when I was still in Dublin, I was hungry and I'm lazy, so I ordered some food, and then I needed to hail a taxi to help me get to the airport in the morning, and then my flight was delayed, so I wanted to see, am I actually going to make it on time and catch the last Arlanda Express, which I did by 20 seconds. And then, I'm on the plane for 2.5 hours, and there's a lot of noisy kids, and I figured I needed some kind of soundtrack to drown all this noise. And of course, I had to figure out how I was going to get here today, which thankfully I know, because Lanetta is my favorite place in Stockholm so far, and it's just right next door. And regardless of how any of this goes today, I'm going to be Instagramming, about what a fantastic time this was. So in many ways, we feel like we're in control. But really, I'd argue this is just an illusion, because in reality, we really only control 3 things. We control our bodies, our breath, how much sleep we get, how much exercise we get, the kind of food that we eat, the body language that we give off to people. We can control our emotions as well, for the most part. Obviously, there are chemical and biological reasons that make this more difficult for some people than others. But quite generally speaking, we control the level of gratitude that we display in the world. We control our anger, our frustration, the self-talk that goes on in our own heads. And the third thing that we can control are the choices that we make in life. And for first world type people, like all of us are fortunate enough to be here today, this includes the things like where we go to school, where we work, the clothes that we decided to wear, our partners in life, whether we're iPhone or Android people. But really, in a universal sense, we actually control very, very little. And if you look around this room right now, like, the only thing that you can control is yourself. So at a global level, if you think about all the people that exist in the world, this is something like 1.31 times 10 to the minus 10th power. Like, it is infinitesimally small. And this doesn't include all the other things in the world and in the cosmos over which we have absolutely no control whatsoever. Now, oddly, in the work that I do as a coach, as I start working with people and we kind of unearth the things that hold them back, there's often a really common thread, and it's this lack of control that people feel in their lives. And this belief that we have that if we can just control everything, like, we'd be secure, things would be certain, and everything would be just fine. But like we kind of just established, you guys all get mathematics pretty well, like, this is total rubbish. Like, we don't have this capability. Yet this is a trap that really, really smart people fall into on a pretty consistent basis. And furthermore, for those of us who might be leaders, this is actually how a lot of people lead. And a survey that was conducted in 2014 said that nearly 60% of people say they work for micromanagers. And about half of those people say that it negatively impacts their productivity and their performance. Now, how many of us have had bosses like this? Quick show of hands. Yeah, well, that's about 60%. And how did it feel? Yeah, I see some thumbs down. Yeah, it's pretty shitty. Yeah. And how many of us have been bosses like this? I have to raise my hand here. Yeah. Me too. Like, my first attempts at management weren't great. I sought to control a lot of things. I'm the kind of person that I like a lot of structure in life. I'm really interested in how things work, so I really like to get into the details. And I tried to manage quite the same way when I first got into management. And I hadn't really copped on at that point in time to what building a great team really requires. And it's things like, empowerment, trust, autonomy, delegation. And I see the role of a leader now as being someone who's there to create an environment where great things can happen. And then most of the time, my role is to just get the hell out of the way and let the people that are on my team do what they do best. So in many ways, this whole idea of command and control as a leader is dead to me. So enough about control. I think we've determined that we have a minimal amount of control. And quite frankly, there's a lot of things that we have to accept in life. Now, does this mean that we have to take things just as they are and that they're completely immutable? Well, no, of course not. But it does mean that there are certainly a lot of things that we just have absolutely no control over, and we have to accept at least to an extent. For example, we know that this guy, Donald Trump, is probably going to tweet something incredibly ridiculous in the next 24 hours. And we know that Brexit is probably going to end up as a complete mess, and this clicker is also going to end up as a complete mess too. Anyways, and Ben Franklin, said, the only certainties in life are death and taxes. And as an Irish person, I pretty much have to accept that the weather sucks, and I'm probably going to have to carry an umbrella and a jacket with me for the rest of my life. Now, obviously, we have some influence over some of these. Like, I'm still an American citizen, even though I'm an Irish citizen too, and I have a vote in the States, so I can try to influence things politically. But these things like weather and taxes, our own mortality, and the lack of control that we have over other people, these are just truisms in life. And I don't think it's a sign of weakness to say that, you just have to accept certain things. In fact, I'd say it's quite the opposite. I think it's really wise. It shows a lot of maturity and a lot of confidence to know when you have to accept things. And this really means that in many ways, you have an understanding of how to cope with the world, how to self-manage yourself, and how to build resilience. And in work, there's obviously a lot that we have to accept too. Like, sometimes we end up with bad managers, suboptimal colleagues. We end up working on projects that are kind of doomed from the start. Maybe we don't get enough headcount and enough budget to do the things that we actually want to do. And we all suffer setbacks and failures and obstacles in our life and not getting our way. And in fact, one of my biggest projects about 5 years into my career at Amazon was one of the hugest screw-ups that I ever had. I was working on a spam abatement project for customer service. I mentioned I owned all the mail routing. And we were trying to take every externally facing email address that customers could write to and make some changes so that we didn't just continually receive millions of spam emails. And I had some serious execution problems in getting into production. This is why I ended up in management. I was kind of mediocre as an engineer. But I ended up misrouting like tons of mail, like literally like tens of thousands of messages, and I left hundreds of people who worked in customer service without any work to do, and we still had to pay them for the day. But, you know, when this all happened, like, I couldn't lose my head about this. I had to just kind of accept my fate and obviously take responsibility for what was happening. So I engaged the project manager that I was working with on this at the time. I explained the situation. I told her what my plan forward was going to be. I assured her that I'd fixed everything. And a couple months later, she ended up hiring me for the job that moved me to California with A9. And I was kind of surprised by this. You know, I figured, I just made a total mess of this, and you're going to move me to California. And she said to me, you know, it's these qualities of ownership and commitment that I saw in you that are the kinds of things that I really wanted in the team that I was building at A9. So the point I'm trying to make here is in those moments of acceptance, how we respond is really what makes all the difference. And at Amazon, we had this really interesting leadership principle for these moments where you couldn't really control the outcome, and you just had to accept the situation. And this leadership principle is called have backbone, disagree, and commit. And the spirit behind this principle was that leaders should tenaciously yet respectfully challenge ideas when they disagree with them. And that we shouldn't compromise just for the sake of social cohesion, because conflict can be difficult. Because when we do that, we often make really suboptimal choices that don't have a benefit for our customer. And once a decision had been taken, even if you lost, you were expected to commit fully to helping the company move things forward. Now, as an owner at Amazon, which everyone was expected to behave like, you obviously were encouraged to bring your data, to put forth your arguments, and to have that backbone, but also to know when you needed to support the direction of the organization. And I think this is actually a huge part of Amazon's success, because it's not about building like a headstrong, abrasive, conflict-driven culture, but it's more about turning conflict into a positive. And it's about building a culture that actually challenges and questions the ideas that we bring forth and helps bring out the best in our team so that we deliver the best things for our customers. And really, this pushes us and ensures that we're all expending energy, all kind of pushing in one direction. And I want to stress that when we're talking about challenging here, we're talking about challenging ideas. We're not talking about challenging people. And I think that's one thing that sometimes people get wrong. And that obviously it can be an attributing factor to why people avoid conflict. But not everyone responds very well when they're up against the wall, and there are often three outcomes that we see. There's the fight response, the flight response, and trying to find a way to push through it. And now, I worked with all sorts of people at Amazon. We obviously hired lots of people who were fighters, really, really strong individuals. And I even worked with a few people who threw their milkshakes as if they were being chased by zombies as well. And I'll tell you that in the long run, like, none of these people really thrived that well at Amazon, and very few of them really survived. But it was those people that were able to find a path forward, despite immense obstacles, taking on those tough problems, that were the ones that really got ahead in their careers. And now, this is probably no surprise from a company that decided, hey, like, we can't trust UPS and the Postal Service to deliver our packages, so, like, we're going to hire 20 jets and create something called Prime Air. And Amazon actually flies a lot of their stuff around the US by themselves now. So we've established, like, we control very little in life. We have to accept a lot. But the favorite part for me is this idea of influence. This is what I really like about CIA. Now, we exert loads of influence throughout our lives, both towards our family, our friends, and how we raise our children, and how we vote, and the products and services that we buy. And we obviously use influence a lot in our careers as well, both in terms of how we share our ideas, how we lead other people, and how we achieve these outcomes that we want to desire. And I mentioned My role is the Amazon general manager in Dublin, and that probably sounds like a job that came with tons of authority, but in fact, it was like the exact opposite. It was a complete exercise in leading and influence. Now, while I was well known and reasonably well respected, I suppose, at Amazon, I was the longest tenured employee in the country of Ireland. There were like 150 people who had worked there longer than me in the entire company when I left. I happened to be one of the smallest teams in Dublin at a site that was overwhelmingly AWS, and I worked on the retail side of the business. So this meant, this presented some major challenges for me. It wasn't like a natural kind of fit. So in the end, I didn't really end up with any budget. I had no real mandate, and I had no authority. So my role was very much one where I just had to lead through influence. And in many ways, I think I actually got better results in the end than I would have with a pure authority model. Because what I did was I came up with this vision for the site and what it could be. I shared this really broadly with people. People bought in. They really helped me refine it and make it into something that was really fantastic. And together, we achieved a significant number of the objectives that we set out to. And my view on this as to why that happened was because I think when you influence other people and you get them to buy into what you're doing and they believe that they're doing the right thing through their own free will, you get significantly different results than when you're just trying to use sort of a command control model, especially with really smart people like we hired at Amazon and like I've met at Klarna. People that are that bright don't really like to be told what to do. Now, there's a couple people that have done some research on this topic that I find really fascinating, and they're two gentlemen named Daniel Pink and Simon Sinek, and you might be familiar with their work. But Daniel Pink's, in his book Drive, he makes this argument that the research shows that what motivates people aren't things like cash bonuses and more pay. Now, they work to an extent, especially with really, really repetitive tasks, but not so well with things that require a high level of cognitive ability that's representative of the type of work that we would do here at Klarna. And that when you want to unlock a really deep level of intrinsic motivation in people, you've got to be able to fulfill three things for them. The first one is this sense of purpose. Why are we here doing what we're doing? What is it that brings meaning and something more important to our life? And the second one is this sense of being able to master your craft. Humans like to get really good at things. We like to be able to add more skills. And lastly, the third one is autonomy. And this is all about our desire to be self-directed. And when you're self-directed, your level of engagement is significantly higher than when you're just complying with someone's directions. And Pink says that when all three of these things are fulfilled, true motivation is unlocked and you can do some really great things. Now, Sinek, on the other hand, his work is really about, at least in the book Start With Why, is really about the power of inspiration when you're trying to influence people. And he sums it up with this fairly simple model that you see here behind me called the golden circle. Now, Sinek argues that all companies know what they do. Most companies can talk pretty clearly about how they do it, but very few companies are actually able to express why they do it. And the ones that can do that are the ones that are actually really, truly inspirational and a lot of people really follow. And he offers a number of great examples in the book. He talks about Martin Luther King Jr., he talks about the Wright brothers, but I think one of the ones that's easiest to understand is Apple Computer. Now, Apple's a company who's pretty much driven, well, about 2/3 of their business is driven by one product, the iPhone. Yet they've the biggest valuation for a public company in the entire world. Now, other companies obviously make good products, but like, how come nobody bought Dell's MP3 players or Microsoft's phones weren't particularly successful? And a lot of this comes down to the marketing message that Apple puts out there into the world. And it goes kind of something like this, like we like to think differently, we challenge the status quo, we design really beautiful and easy to use products, and we just happen to make computers. Would you like to buy one? And this works because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And it's not about selling to everybody, but it's about selling to those people that see the world the same way that you do. So if you, apparently, like me, think that you're like someone who challenges the status quo and thinks differently, well, that Apple marketing message might really resonate with you. Because in a lot of ways, the choices and the actions that we take in life align with our own self-perceptions that we have of ourselves. Now, furthermore, he argues there's roots for biology in this. The golden circle in many ways reflects how our brain has evolved. So in the center of our brain, the really, really old part is this reptilian part of the brain that's responsible for decision making. And around that, you have the limbic brain, which is responsible for emotions. And neither of these two parts of the brain have any capacity for language, but they drive all human decisions and behavior. And the neocortex, which actually does have the capacity for language, is what's developed later in human evolution. And this is the part of the brain that helps us rationalize the choice that we've made and why these features and all these benefits make sense. And that's why I bought this iPhone, not because my reptilian brain said so. And Sinek argues that organizations should really be driven from their why, both in terms of how they create, how they communicate, and how they measure things within their organization. And he says that you could pay anybody to do a job, but if you hire people who believe in that why, they'll work for you with their blood, sweat, and their tears. So as I got a little bit further into my management career and I really started thinking about Pink's work on motivation and what Sinek had to say, it was a big change for me in terms of how I started leading my teams. And I found that in many ways it was easier for me to just hire really, really awesome people, have a really strong, powerful why that kind of served as a North Star for us, and a shared mental model that was a framework within which we could all operate. And then I just got the hell out of the way and let them do what they do best. So I've kind of shared this concept of CIA with you now. And I want to talk a little bit about how my own life has been punctuated by a number of events that brought this concept front and center for me. Now, my time at Amazon obviously taught me a lot about this too, because Amazon's a company that really encourages you to focus on controlling the things that you can control, to be open to other perspectives, and to use your influence widely. Amazon has a massive army of lobbyists. And to accept failure as an eventuality and a truism in life, but also to be able to respond appropriately to it, to fail fast, learn and iterate and move forward. And my more recent work as a coach highlights this for me even further because I see what happens when people mix these three things up. So I just want to share a few quick lessons from my own journey in the hopes that maybe it'll offer some new perspectives for you or give you a little bit of food for thought about this further. And the first one of these is one that came, it's a lesson about control and acceptance, and it unfortunately came very early for me in life. Now, I was a typical adolescent in high school. My whole life was ahead of me. No sense of my own mortality yet. Probably stupider than I was smarter. And I felt like I was in total control of my life. And I wasn't that stupid. Like, my grades were really good. I graduated near the top of my class. I was about to go off to university in the fall. But sometimes life has a really funny way of kicking you in the teeth. And when I was about 17, I was about 2 weeks from starting university. I got a phone call one day from my father's best friend to tell me that my dad had just committed suicide. My dad and my mom split up when I was about 11. He moved away for a few years, and he came back when I was about 14. And we tried to rebuild a relationship between ourselves, and we had some success. But my dad struggled a lot with codependency, and he was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder later in his life. And while he kind of tried to fight through a lot of these challenges, eventually he ended up succumbing to this, and he took his own life. And in fact, it's just been a few weeks ago that marks 28 years since I got that phone call. And it's not the life lesson that you want to get when you're 17. But I think it teaches you really quickly, or at least it taught me very quickly, about the importance of control in life and the fact that we have very little of it and that we have to accept a lot of stuff. It also got me to appreciate my own mortality, finally, and to really appreciate that of those around me that I cared about. But overall, I responded pretty well to this as an immature 17-year-old. I kept my life on the rails. I ended up going to university. I finished. I met my wife when I was in college. And after we got married, we moved to Seattle pretty quickly. And the second of these lessons came for me there. And it was a big lesson in influence. And this lesson was really about knowing your audience. So I mentioned I worked at the Amazon help desk and that I was responsible for onboarding all new employees. And I was working on a project one year where I was tasked with being able to onboard 15,000 new employees pretty much at the push of a button. It was Q4 for us at Amazon, and we brought in tons of temporary labor to support what we were doing in the fulfillment centers and customer service. And as I started doing the research for this project, I realized that it seemed like we were going to run out of user IDs. And these are the days where we were still on 32-bit systems at Amazon. And without getting terribly technical, though I think most of you probably get that, basically what it meant was we weren't going to be able to hire new people and give them accounts in our systems where they could actually do work. So I brought my story to management and to leadership within the organization, thinking it's probably a big deal, like if we can't hire people. And I was summarily dismissed as a junior engineer who really didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But I was pretty determined. Like, I'm not a dummy, you know. Like, I was pretty certain there was a grave problem here. And my manager was really great at the time, and he knew me well enough to realize, like, I had pretty good instincts. So he said, you know, Jeff, like, why don't you, like, show your work on how you got there? Because I'm not sure that you're telling the story the right way. And I'm thinking the whole time, like, how the hell do you all not get this? Like, we're not going to be able to hire people. Like, Amazon's going to die. But anyways, I took his advice, and I came back armed with all the maths and the projections, the recent hiring trends, what things look like year over year, and I just had it all laid out. And I had all this data, and I ran up to my VP, a really nice man named Tom Killeley, who I still talk to these days. And I also still have the email that he sent that day. And it said, I was wrong, Jeff was right, he who brings the most data wins. And my point here is that these moments where you feel like you're not being understood and you're not being heard in the world, it's not everyone else's fault. It's not their problem, it's your problem. And in this case, it was my problem. And it was all about how I communicated that message. So it's really important to understand, like, how your audience sees the world. And I'll touch on this a little bit later near the end. But the next lesson for me was one that led to, like, some of the greatest outcomes in my career. And I'd spoken on how our response in these situations where we have to accept things is key. And it's not always been a strong suit for me. Like, I'm pretty opinionated. But I began to realize later in my Amazon career that the thing that separated the people who were really getting ahead in the company was that they weren't just highlighting problems that we had, but they were also bringing solutions to the table. And we have a saying in the United States that goes, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. And so if you want to really get ahead, like, bring something different. And this was what got me to Europe in the first place. Like, I had talked with my leadership about the fact that I wanted to live internationally. I wanted to try to spend a couple years abroad and experience what that was like. And they wanted to expand our operations team globally. So I was the solution to that problem, and things fit together nicely. And the biggest break in my career was from another such opportunity. And I mentioned that Amazon Dublin was about 300 people or so when I took over as the general manager. But before that, I was part of the local leadership team that was responsible for looking after the site. It was just like all the main leads from sort of the organizations on site that were kind of at a certain level in the company and above. And while we were growing really, really rapidly and things were going quite well for us, there were a lot of cracks that were starting to show. And there were some really obvious ways. Kind of like I see at Klarna, we didn't have enough desks. There was nowhere to put everybody. But there were littler ways, too. And the way that I ended up in this role was I went to wash my coffee cup one day. And there was no dish soap in the entire building. I walked all 3 floors of the building. I'm working for one of the biggest, most successful companies in the world. And I can't even wash my mug. And I'm thinking, OK, I'm going to go back to my desk and do some calculations on, like, how many sick days this is going to amount to for the company. And dish soap was a reality, obviously, but it was also a metaphor for a lot of other things that were happening. We had a huge stack of parcels at reception that weren't getting picked up, and others that weren't getting delivered because we hadn't paid our DHL bill. And we ran most of the core infrastructure for Amazon, and all of our engineers relied on their phones to get pages when things broke, but somebody forgot to pay the mobile bill. So all of our phones went dead. And the best one was the day that I realized, because I shared an office with our facilities manager, that we almost didn't pay the energy bill for the data centers. So yeah, this was kind of a big deal. Like, Amazon's entire European business would have gone dark. Now, luckily, we caught that when we fixed it. But, like, what was really happening was, like, we were like 25 little startups, kind of all under the same roof. We were all parts of different organizations. There was really nothing that bound us together in a common identity, and there really wasn't anyone looking after the common good. And I already said, like, I was one of the smallest teams, not part of AWS, but I knew the company. I was viewed as a safe pair of hands, and this was another time in my career where I felt like maybe I could offer some solutions. So I wrote up all these issues that I saw, and I shared this with my leadership, and I ended up one afternoon on a call with a gentleman named Jeff Blackburn. Jeff Blackburn is one of the senior vice presidents that reports to Jeff Bezos, and he was the head of my chain. And he says to me, well, thanks for sharing this, Jeff. It sounds like there's some really serious problems there. Do you think there's anything that you could do? So, of course, I raised my hand again, and I say, yeah, sure. I'm willing to try to take it on and see what we can do. So Jeff goes and has a chat with Andy Jassy, who's the CEO of AWS, and basically says, we have a guy there that thinks, he could maybe solve some of these problems. So I got some support, and I went around to the rest of the local leadership team, and I kind of sold them all on what was going on, because I didn't want to be seen as just trying to make a power grab here. And I shared with them my vision for the site, which was that I really felt like with the mix of teams that we had there, like we could be the technical hub for EMEA, for Amazon. And in many ways, we were kind of like the engine room that powered the whole company. And I shared a number of ideas in which I thought we could overcome some of these hurdles that we were facing. And a couple months later, I end up as the general manager for Dublin. And over the next 3 years, the site grew from 300 people to about 1,300 or 1,400. And it was a really fantastic experience for me. But it was it was one that I just, I never really expected that's how things would turn out. I didn't think that was how you got ahead in your career. But leading through influence, I think I was actually able to accomplish a lot more than I ever anticipated I would. And there's a quote that I'm really fond of on this topic that says, power is a tool and influence is a skill. One is a fist and the other one's a fingertip. And I would argue that even if you have authority, I think it's still easier to hire the right people, create that environment where they can do great things, and stand back and let them do what they do best. And to give them a gentle nudge as opposed to trying to strong-arm people. So yeah, that's great for you, Jeff. Nice career story, well done. What can I do with this myself? Well, there are a few things that you can do, obviously. And the first one, I would say, is practice your CIA. And the sooner you can recognize the type of situation that you're dealing with, the more energy and the more sanity that you're going to be able to conserve in your own lives. And I think it's really important to know what you can control in every situation. And usually, this is going to be your own response. And when you know you're dealing with a situation of acceptance, this is the time where you can start to plan for mitigations and try to lessen the blow for those things that you can't control. And when the need for influence arises, you can take the time to plan and figure out your own communication path forward. And I realize as I'm talking about influence here, this might sound like something some of you are kind of skeptical about, like maybe a game that you don't want to play. And this isn't about politics. This is about the fact that when we're trying to do the things like we did at Amazon or like we do at Klarna, it takes all of us as a team to be working together to push all that energy in one direction. So the second thing that we can do is practice positively accepting acceptance, or put another way, disagree and commit to the path forward. Now, I mentioned that, there's death, taxes, Trump tweets. These are all certainties that we've got to accept. And we might have to reframe our mindsets in some ways and realize that we can't control everything. And for those of you that try to, I would encourage you to question your own beliefs about why you do that and what you actually are able to gain from trying to control everything. And why is it so important? And does it really give you what you think it does in life? And I would venture to wager a guess that the answer is probably no. So if you can start letting some of these beliefs and these behaviors go, and ask yourself the question, like, what's the worst thing that would happen if I stop trying to control this? I think you might see some interesting things happen. Now, for those of you that manage engineers and you used to be an engineer like I was, this can be really painful, because what this often looks like is things take slower to get done. It's not done the way that I would do it. Maybe things fail and break. But I would encourage you to ask yourself the question of, what might this unleash or develop in other people if I give them the opportunity to learn from their own failure and their own mistakes? And lastly, I would say, work on managing your own response in these moments, because that disagree and commit concept is a really important one to keep in mind. Now, lastly, The third thing I would say is go out and practice your influence skills. Now, I mentioned earlier that people think differently when I was talking about the story of onboarding people at Amazon. And it's really important to understand where people land in the world. And that was a case where I clearly didn't know my audience. And again, it was fully my problem in terms of how I conveyed the message. And there's a tool that I use in my coaching work that talks about the thinking preferences that we all have. And this tool is called emergenetics. Whoops. And emergenetics posits that we all exist somewhere on this spectrum across 4 thinking attributes: analytical, structural, conceptual, and social. And these are about preferences. They're not about ability. Like, we all can think in these spaces, but obviously we all have a comfort zone that's easier for us to exist in. And when we push out of that, it just takes a lot more energy for us. So how your message is tailored towards the people that you're dealing with and where they fit into this is really important in terms of how it will reach them. So make sure that you know your audience and you're able to adapt your type of message so that you can effectively communicate with different types of people. Obviously, I had people that were in the blue quadrant at Amazon there. And the second thing is, again, a little bit more of this know your audience stuff. And it's all about how people make decisions. You know, some people need that data to be able to rationalize things in their mind. Other people make those gut decisions that we talked about earlier, where you don't have the language capacity to actually express it, but you just feel it. Other people make really, decisions from the heart. And other people need a bit of social proof. They need to have a little bit of momentum and see other people doing things so that they will fall in line and agree with what you want them to. And the last thing that I would say is just focus on those nonverbal cues. So what is their body language telling you? And more importantly, since you can control it yourself, what is your own body language telling them? And nonverbal communication are these things like body language, facial expressions, gestures, and these actually account for about 70% of human communication. And the tone with which we deliver things accounts for about another 22, 23%. So like 92% of human communication isn't about the words that we use. Now, obviously, the words are really important, but we have to keep that whole package in mind as we're figuring out how we're going to talk to people. So my time's nearly up here. But if I could send you off with 3 pieces of advice today, I think they'd look something like this. Buy a new clicker. No, sorry. Life gives us 3 types of events, so know which one you're dealing with. Second, success. Yeah, this clicker, man. Success is often a result of how you respond to adversity and your ability to influence others. So remember, bring solutions to the table, not just problems. And lastly, as leaders, I think it's really important for us all to focus on creating psychologically safe spaces where we can openly and respectfully challenge ideas to achieve the best outcomes. So thank you all for coming on this little journey through CIA with me. You can reach me here if you want to chat about this anymore. And I'm in the office usually 3 days a week. And I'd invite each of you as you go away today to think about what you can control, how you can use your influence more effectively, and how you can respond positively to those things in life that you simply have to expect. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.